Dead by Daylight isn't just a game of chasing and looping. It's a game of chess, where every little detail matters. And understanding the basic core fundamentals of DBD is your first step to succeeding throughout the fog. Good players don't win because they spin the killers at Shack. They win because they understand how the map works and how to manage those resources provided to them by the game. The real skill isn't looping fancy. It's knowing the hidden fundamentals that separate the pros from the amateurs. Certain techniques throughout this video are going to be looked down upon because of the general player basis consensus on certain aspects of how the game should be played at a fundamental level, but I'm here to show you that there are a lot of different strategies that you can implement throughout your time playing the game that can be crucial in succeeding in a lot of scenarios. Whether you're a survivor player or a killer player, this video aims to help you succeed throughout the fog, and I hope that you enjoy this video, and let's get right into it. Crows aren't just background noise. They're an underrated piece of the stealth game. For survivors, crows are natural snitches. Stand still for too long or run too close, and it'll fly off with a loud caw, giving the killer a free sound cue and visual indicator on your location. That's why smart survivors crouch. They walk wide around perched crows, and they try to break line of sight before they scatter. But here's the flip side. Survivors can use crows too. If you see a crow fly up in the distance, that's free info. It might mean an injured teammate is running that way, or it might be the killer cutting through tiles to get an off angle to try to surprise you. In a way, crows work like a tiny free bond perk, telling you where the action is happening on the map if you pay attention. For killers, crows are like free motion sensors. If you hear one squawk in the distance, that's a clue someone's nearby, maybe crouched in a bush, maybe waiting behind a rock trying to go for a flashlight save or a pallet stun. Good killers use these indicators and use that information to seek out that ratting survivor. Say you're in a 1v1 fighting for that last kill at the exit gate. You're going back and forth from gate to gate, hopelessly searching for that last survivor, when all of a sudden you see that crow fly up in the distance. You immediately know you weren't over there. Using those clues, you start to patrol that area and you find that survivor. If a player gets too close to a crow, they make a small noise and it flies up into the skybox. That crow will then return 15 seconds later, possibly making another small sound as they land. This event can be triggered by both survivors and killers. The noise of the crows will not present a visual cue to the killer unless they have a perk Spies from the Shadows, which provides a visual cue at a certain range. Survivors can avoid startling crows by crouching past them. However, if they come too close to a crow, while doing so, it will get startled. Killers will always startle crows with the exception of a cloaked wraith, a crouching pig, or a ghost face, and a crawling xenomorph. A shot from the Redeemer will always startle any crows within 24 meters of the gunshot. Here are some of the conditions when it comes to startling a crow as a survivor. According to the wiki, your movement speed has a direct influence on whether or not you are going to have a higher likelihood of disturbing a crow when you run by them. If a player comes within 0.6 meters of a crow, it will fly away regardless, whether you're walking or running. When you spawn into any map on DBD, your immediate thought should be, where should I go to make myself the hardest target to chase? If I do get chased, where can you lead the killer to prevent him from interrupting your fellow survivors that are working on the generators? Creating a basic understanding of tile spawns throughout maps will significantly help you improve. For example, if you understand how a main building flows into the rest of the map, you can use that main building and connect it to other resources to essentially give yourself a pseudo infinite, not allowing the killer to chase you. And if the killer doesn't realize quick enough, you're going to waste a significant amount of his time, and hopefully all of the gens around the map start to pop. As you can see in the video right now, 3 of my survivors are on generators and I'm looping at Shack. I know that they are not in risk until he leaves the chase. One thing I picked up pretty early on when they introduced the new UI elements into the game, where it shows you who's actively in chase and who's actively doing things around the map, you can use a lot of this information to further enhance your own survivor gameplay. Say you see somebody on a generator, you see somebody on a hook, and you see somebody getting chased. You're currently on a generator closest to that unhook. In your mind, what should you be doing? I'll give you a couple seconds to answer down in the comments. You should be going for that save if you didn't know already. The UI is an exceptional way to get information that normally you would not have access to in the old versions of Dead by Daylight. It's one of those things that if you're a smart survivor and you can understand how the HUD works in this game, it's going to only enhance your own survivor gameplay. I think one of the biggest elements to building better game sense as killer is understanding when a survivor is trying to waste your time and understanding when you should and shouldn't drop a chase. This is probably one of the hardest things when you're first learning to play DBD to kind of understand first and foremost, because you want to be able to get that person that is been taunting you the entire game, but sometimes it makes a lot more sense for you to go for those targets that are in a lot worse position than your current target. How do you know when a target is in a better position than others? Well, that's simple. At the beginning of the game, you're going to be able to see all of the generators around the map. What you need to do at the start is understand that DBD most of the time is a game of patience and playing the long game. Establishing where a 3-gen is around the map or an area of the map that you can control and push survivors towards, so eventually that part of the map becomes depleted of a lot of those valuable resources. So when you do go to defend it in the end game, or when you do go to defend it in a 1-gen left scenario, survivors have very little options when it comes to looping you in chase, so they'll go down very quickly if they don't run to a specific area of the map that's safe. Maps and perks like Deja Vu help survivors to understand where the 3-gen is early on in the game. And a general rule of thumb for survivors is understanding where that 3-gen is and trying to break that as soon as possible. In DBD, time is your most valuable resource. When it comes to playing survivor, the amount of time that you spend during chase is the amount of time that your other survivors are able to be on the gen for free. When you're playing killer, the amount of time that you are spending chasing one single survivor often allows the other survivors around the map to just be doing other gens uncontested. In reality, the best possible scenario for you as a killer is to try to split your pressure by injuring multiple survivors. This may not always be the case depending on the killer that you're playing. Some killers are a lot better at injuring multiple survivors than others. A general rule of thumb is when you injure multiple survivors, it forces those survivors to reset, which means they have to either get together and heal up, or they have to use a resource like a med kit or search a chest, which further wastes their survivor time. Think of Dead by Daylight as a long game. The more resources you're able to pull from a survivor, the easier that the game is going to become over time. If you're able to injure multiple survivors, you're going to force them to use their medkits early throughout the game. This is going to force survivors to come together and reset. This is an excellent opportunity for you as a killer to get multiple injuries or even multiple downs when you catch survivors out when they're trying to heal each other. Mind games are tactics used to outsmart your opponent during chases, whether it be hiding your red stain as you round a corner or moonwalking to catch a survivor off guard. There's a lot of things that you can do as a killer player to throw your survivor opponent off guard. Survivor body language often gives you cues on whether or not you can use mind games to an effective rate. If you see a survivor that is pathing with their head down and they're not looking behind them, a lot of the time you can use this to your advantage and try to implement moonwalking to try to throw a survivor off that might not be using check spots to their full advantage. I didn't fully explain what a check spot is, but it's basically a spot on a tile where a survivor can stand and mid-chase evaluate whether or not they should vault a pallet. Not only knowing check spots on survivor is a huge advantage, but also knowing where they are as a killer main can give you a significant advantage on whether or not you should continue on chasing that survivor, or maybe you should move on to a survivor that's not as confident on their check spots. Getting into what I like to call the 1 to 3 rule. Basically, when you're looping as a survivor, there's going to be times where a killer is going to try to mind game you at a pallet or at a window. And when it comes to whether or not you should vault instantly or vault on the third time that the killer doubles back is very likely up to the situation in hand. For example, you're looping a pallet and you have a killer that is double backing once, double backing twice. After the second time they double back, usually people get pissed, and on the third time, they're just going to fully commit to swinging through and trying to hit you. You can use this to your advantage. In the next chase, that killer is probably not going to give you 3 chances to vault, so that time you instantly vault. Now, from a killer's perspective, one thing that you can do to kind of assess the skill of a survivor is if they instantly vault when you go to mind game them, you know that they have a habit of panic vaulting. So in the future, you can just do one mind game and that will get them to vault and give you a free down. One thing that people often overlook is how important it is to properly zone a player or properly zone yourself. When you're chasing a survivor around a loop, rotating around a loop in a specific way to force that survivor to drop the pallet on a side that is not favorable for them. For instance, if a survivor's looping you and they drop a pallet and behind them is the shack, their next move is going to go straight to shack. But if you zone them on the other side of the pallet where the other side has no resources, you're properly zoning that survivor. So the next time that you catch up to them after you kick that pallet, they're going to have nothing. Now, from the survivor perspective, what you need to keep in mind is where you're going to be able to go to next after you drop that pallet. If you drop the pallet and behind you, you have no resources, you're going to go down pretty quickly. Now compare that to dropping a pallet and knowing behind you, you have a stronger structure that you can continue on with the chase. You're going to start doing a lot better in your chases if you start thinking like this. This is just me in post-production. I also thought of when you're looping, it is very important to try to force the killer to chase you in a certain direction around a loop. This is going to allow you to kind of dictate where you're able to go next after you start that chase. Bloodlust was initially added to help killers, especially those with lower mobility and no range attacks, to catch up to survivors who managed to evade them for prolonged periods of time. One of the several motivators for adding Bloodlust originally were the so-called infinite vault locations that allowed survivors to endlessly loop a killer. At that time, when neither Bloodlust nor the entity blocker mechanic was part of the game. In order for a killer to be in an active chase, all 3 of the following conditions must occur. A survivor enters the killer's field of view within 12 meters of them. That survivor is running. The killer is walking. If any of these 3 conditions is not met, the game will not initiate a chase and not charge Bloodlust. Keep this in mind for later in the video. There are several ways a chase can end. The distance between the killer and the chase survivor increases past 18 meters. The survivor hides in a locker for 5 seconds or more. The killer loses line of sight for more than 8 seconds. Bloodlust activates after 15 seconds of an uninterrupted chase, and it increases the killer's movement speed in tiers based on their initial movement speed at the time. Each tier adds a stacking movement bonus, and the speed boost increases the longer the chase continues without the killer hitting a survivor or breaking a pallet. After the initial 15 seconds, Bloodlust gains additional tiers every 10 seconds, up to a maximum of 3 tiers. As a survivor, the longer that you're in chase with the killer and you don't see them break a pallet, you need to understand that what they're doing is they're trying to build Bloodlust and essentially try to get a free hit, which you can deny by simply dropping a pallet and waiting for them to kick it. And if you're confident with your check spots, more often than not, that killer is going to be forced to break the pallet. As killer, understand that certain pallets in this game are considered god pallets and unmind gameable. depending on the level of survivor that you're going against, is going to determine on whether or not you should kick that pallet. If you see a survivor constantly panic vaulting, maybe you don't need to kick that pallet. Or if they're at the edge of the map and they're at one of the weaker pallets in the game, try to force that survivor to drop that pallet. Don't kick it and try to force out a hit. But if you see a survivor waiting patiently at the pallet, not moving, just standing still, what they're doing is they're trying to break Bloodlust. The longer that they are standing still for and not running or holding shift, the quicker that you are going to lose your Bloodlust. Obviously, there are some killers in the game that kind of understandably counter god pallets in a way. You have Nurse that can physically just blink through a pallet and just deny it completely. You have Billy that, in my opinion, if he has overdrive, nowhere is safe. I'm gonna be honest with you. Kaneki, he can just vault straight over a pallet and you're pretty much dead after that because his recovery speed is extremely fast. And there's other various killers that I haven't mentioned that someone's probably going to talk about in the comments below that are able to counter these god pallets, but that is using their killer's power. Keep an eye out for what survivors bring into the trial. Each game can be completely different based on how each survivor uses their item. C4 toolboxes, it could be a Sabo squad or a full gen rush team. Stumble into a team full of flashlights, you know that they're going to be heavily altruistic, which could lead to their inevitable downfall. What about medkits? Unless you're playing Plague, a lobby full of medkits can be one of the scariest things to go against. Pay close attention to the survivor during chase. If you notice their medkit disappear, they probably popped a styptic or potentially an insta heal. What I'm getting at is that the lobby is the most important time for you to assess what perks / add-ons you can run to combat these survivors. Stealth is an extremely underrated aspect of Dead by Daylight. Even with it being a horror game, people often look down upon stealthing. I'm here to tell you that stealthing in certain situations makes sense. For example, if you are the only person that has been hooked and you manage to get healed up and escape the killer's pursuit, you want to just play more passively. Passively doesn't mean sitting in a corner waiting for your teammates to do the gens. Passively means you're on a generator, you're analyzing the survivor UI, and when you see that the killer drops chase and then you start to hear that killer's terror radius, maybe that should be a sign for you to step up off that gen and walk away, maybe break line of sight to just mess with that killer. It is one of the most frustrating things as a killer player, trying to find a survivor so you can chase them. Building off of trying to be more stealthy, I know this is a complete 180 on that topic. I'm going to get into what I like to call the hook economy. From a killer perspective, understanding how many hooks you have throughout the game and keeping track of what survivors that you've hooked. So in the event that you need to eliminate a survivor, you know exactly what survivor that you need to chase, and you can determine that on the fly when you're actually going for a chase. Say you stumble into the one survivor that hasn't been hooked the entire game, and you know they are going to try to waste your time, so you can drop that chase and try to search for a more advantageous chase. The hook economy for survivors could mean a couple of different things. When should you go for that hook save versus when should you go for a trade, where basically means you're going to unhook the survivor and you're gonna get downed. Those are very crucial things when it comes to hook economy, and understanding that one hook state is a lot more beneficial than one of your teammates dying and you being at a 3v1 throughout the rest of the game. Hook states are now 90 seconds per survivor. The time it takes to do a gen is 90 seconds. Taking this into account, it is in your direct benefit to leave that survivor on the hook for a little bit of time while you are potentially finishing a generator. Instantly unhooking a survivor can often lead the killer to returning back to the hook and trying to tunnel out that survivor. We want to try to avoid that. We want to wait for the killer to use his movement abilities, or if a killer doesn't have movement abilities, wait for them to get far enough away from the hook that it's safe for you to go unhook. One thing that you need to think about as a killer and a survivor is hook timing. When a survivor is getting to the point where they're about to hit second stage, some killers will try to force out a hook state. What I mean by this is a killer might stick around the area in order for the hooked survivor to go to second stage. You can avoid this by simply planning ahead and trying to make it a point to secure that unhook on the survivor before the killer decides to come back and secure that hook state. Rebecca's perk Reassurance is a huge counter to this strategy. It allows you to pause your teammate's hook timer by 30 seconds. Some cosmetics in this game, I would argue, are pay to lose, allowing either side to get a competitive advantage over one another by either allowing the survivor to see you over a loop, or when you're trying to hide as a survivor, the killer sees you because you stick out like a sore thumb. This gets me into my next point. Pay attention while you're looping to the environment. More often than not, on the newer maps in Dead by Daylight, there's a lot of tiles that have been introduced that allow you to see the killer's red stain and also portions of their body through the tile. Spacing refers to the distance between the killer and survivor, but on a more detailed level, it allows you to be able to determine whether or not you're able to get a hit before a survivor vaults the window, or allows you to get another loop in safely before the killer is able to catch up. Short swinging. What is it, and what are the advantages of short swinging through pallets as a killer? The advantage of short swinging through pallets on killer is tied to the animation. Whenever you fully lunge for a hit, it's predictable. A survivor can see you winding up and determine whether or not they should drop the pallet or greet it and keep running. But on the other hand, say you were to short swing instead, the animation is a lot more rapid and harder to react to. One disadvantage of short swinging would be if a survivor predicts it and leaves the loop, then you have to make up that distance that you lost by swinging. Another technique that you can try to use is by short swinging next to a pallet to scare the survivor into dropping it. As a survivor, looking out for this gives you significant advantage because say you notice a killer short swinging, you can greet the pallet and use the killer's recovery time to make it to a safer loop or vacuum back to the pallet in order to get a stun on him. If you notice a survivor being greedy and trying to vacuum back to a pallet to stun you, what you can do when you're swinging, look up when you lunge and try to swing through the pallet so you can body block the survivor from dropping the pallet on you. Alright, before I ramble on for another 30 minutes, I want to see what you guys think is a basic fundamental that you wish someone taught you when you first started playing DBD. Let me know down in the comments, and if this video gets over 100 likes, I'll consider making a part 2 to this.